Have you ever wondered what it would feel like if every part of your mind, heart, and spirit worked in perfect harmony? Imagine 12 inner powers, each unique, yet fully united under the guiding presence of Christ, from unwavering faith to disciplined action, from discernment to love, from clarity of vision to transformation of memory. Every inner force aligns to create a life of calm, purpose, and profound inner freedom. This is not just a philosophy. It is a living, breathing journey into your own consciousness, a space where your mind becomes a sanctuary and your life flows effortlessly from the order within. Step in and witness the awakening of your true inner architecture, the beginning, the temple of the mind, and Christ at the center. The mind is likened to a living temple built from thought, where Christ is not a historical figure, but a frequency, the organizing intelligence of the divine that awakens when we no longer give authority to illusion. The human mind is not merely a stream of random thoughts, but a living sanctuary constructed from the very substance of consciousness. Every image you nurture, every belief you uphold, every word you silently repeat, these are the bricks, the pillars, and the atmosphere of this invisible temple. Though unseen by the physical eye, every experience in your life arises from it. Some keep their temple in disarray, cracked walls, a collapsed roof, a shaky foundation, and wonder why their life descends into chaos. Others, however, understand the sacred nature of the temple within and tend to it with wakefulness, like a vigilant keeper guarding a flame that must never be extinguished. At the heart of this temple lies a throne. The question is not whether the throne exists, but who sits upon it. Some allow fear to reign, and their entire mental system becomes shaped by reactivity, doubt, and hypervigilance. Others enthrone the ego, and all their power is marshaled to protect a fragile, fabricated self-image. But when Christ is enthroned, the entire temple is transformed. Christ is not a distant historical icon or a poetic idea confined to scripture. Christ is a frequency, a rhythm of clarity, the divine intelligence already present in you since the beginning. When Christ is at the center, peace is no longer something you seek outside yourself. It becomes your natural atmosphere, for the temple has been restored to sacred order. All your spiritual faculties, once scattered, conflicted, or turned against themselves, are brought into harmony and rightful alignment. Faith ceases to be a naive fantasy and becomes a governing principle. Love is no longer frailty, but cohesive force. Reason is no longer rigid, but refined and illumined. The throne determines the entire structure of the temple, and that throne can only be secured when you cease giving your power to illusions. You have witnessed what happens when the temple is overtaken by an impostor. When fear takes the throne, every thought becomes a rushed reaction. When ego takes control, creative power becomes a defensive weapon. When desire and selfishness are exalted, the temple burns not with sacred fire, but with flames of destruction. In such moments, you realize no matter your talents, your intellect, or your emotional depth, if the throne is occupied by a false ruler, your entire system will turn against you. Christ does not come to compete. Christ reveals himself only when the false rulers are dismissed. When you stop using thought to shield illusion, when you cease manipulating your mental faculties to survive in fear, and begin to allow your powers to serve a higher principle, Christ emerges not with thunder or blinding visions, but with the quiet clarity that restores all things to their rightful place. In that realignment, every faculty returns home. Faith becomes the rock, love the binding force, reason the instrument of refinement, and the mind, no longer chaotic, finds stillness, the noise recedes, disorder dissolves, because the center has been reestablished. This is not an external miracle, but the spiritual order that has always waited to be restored. The temple of your mind alone determines whether your life flows in clarity or confusion. You can build it with bricks of fear and live in shadows. You can construct it from the ego and spend your life guarding a fragile edifice, or you can build it from sacred truth and enthrone Christ at its center. Then the temple becomes a sanctuary of peace, radiating through your words, your choices, your very presence. Nothing outside can destroy this temple. If you keep the center pure, storms may rise, but the winds can only touch the tiles. Never shake the foundation. Others may attack, but they strike only the outer wall, never the light that shines from within. The power of the temple lies not in its appearance, but in its inward order, and that order stands only when Christ is at the center. This is why the spiritual journey is not about acquiring new power, but about returning to cleanse the throne. You do not need more power. You already possess it all. You only need to ask who is sitting on the throne. If it is fear, you will live in turmoil. If it is ego, you will exhaust yourself preserving illusion. But if it is Christ, every inner faculty will fall into divine rhythm, and your life will become a living testimony to the order of the kingdom. The temple does not require ornate decoration or golden walls. It requires a radiant center. When that center is restored, you no longer beg for peace. You think from peace. You no longer plead for strength. You act from strength. You no longer chase the light. You become the bearer of it. And in that moment, life is no longer a desperate pursuit, but a steady flow from within to without. Look upon the temple of your mind. This very moment, ask who sits on the throne. The answer will tell you why your life moves the way it does. And here is the good news. You do not need to rebuild from scratch. You need only restore the center when the throne is returned to the one worthy. Everything else aligns. Peace becomes the foundation. Love the atmosphere, and divine strength, the rhythm of your life. Christ is not far off, nor trapped in history or pages of scripture. Christ is the spiritual pattern, the divine order, the sacred rhythm already dwelling within you. And when you cease to surrender the throne to illusion, you will witness the most wondrous truth of all. The temple was never without light. It was only waiting for your return to rekindle the flame. The center determines the order, and Christ realigns the powers. When ego or fear sits at the center, the powers within are distorted, but when Christ reigns, the 12 faculties are gathered, rightly positioned, and thought no longer scatters, but flows in harmony with divine law. In every temple, it is not the walls or the dome that define its order, but its center. So it is with the mind. The center is the throne, and whoever sits upon it governs the entire system of thought, emotion, and behavior. If ego takes the seat, every power is twisted into a tool to defend a false image. If fear reigns, all spiritual faculties become defensive reflexes, scanning every corner for danger. In such a state, faith becomes a fragile illusion. Love turns into needy dependency, and reason hardens into cold rigidity. You may be intelligent, strong, emotionally rich, but if your center is misaligned, the entire structure turns against you. There is nothing more dangerous than power misused, nothing that fractures the mind faster than a throne occupied by an impostor. But when Christ reigns, the entire system is reordered. Christ does not erase your individuality. He refines it, placing each faculty in its rightful place. Faith no longer wanders but becomes a steadfast foundation. Love no longer melts into emotion but becomes a binding force. Reason no longer isolates but becomes a tool of clarity. Each disciple within you returns to its true dwelling, and the chaos is quieted. The noise in the mind retreats because the throne has been returned to the one who deserves it. This is not a foreign miracle. It is the natural order, long present, simply veiled by a dislocated center. Ask yourself now, who sits upon your inner throne? Is it fear, causing you to calculate every step in anxiety and caution? Is it ego, exhausting you in the effort to preserve a fragile image? Or have you allowed Christ to take his seat at the center, that all powers might cease to scatter and begin to operate under divine law? The answer need not be spoken aloud. You will feel it, for that recognition is the first step toward returning the throne to its rightful sovereign. Christ does not compete. Nordos he intrude. Christ emerges only when you are willing to relinquish the impostors who have claimed a place they never earned. When you no longer take fear as your engine. When you cease to use ego as a crutch, Christ appears. And once the center changes hands, your entire life begins to change. Thought no longer disperses. Energy no longer leaks. The mind becomes consistent. It functions by law, not by impulse. This is when you stop begging for peace and begin to think from peace. You stop waiting for strength and start acting from strength. If you are still listening, I have but one simple question. Can you feel deep within you that there is a center still waiting for your return, waiting for you to surrender control? Not to the world, but to the order already inside you? This question is not for me, it is for you. It tells you where you stand inside your own temple, and if you are still here, still listening to these words, I want to thank you, because the very fact that you paused, that you gave time to reflect on the inner throne, is a sign you desire true order. That is the beginning of every transformation. When the center is Christ, all powers that once fought against each other become a symphony. Faith keeps the rhythm. Love holds the melody. Reason arranges the structure. Discernment filters the noise. And the flame of zeal becomes the engine that propels you forward. You no longer live in tension, pulled in conflicting directions. You begin to feel alignment, clarity, wholeness. The temple then does not merely stand, it shines. And that light does not preach, does not prove, it simply radiates. So ask yourself, to whom will you give the throne? The center decides everything. A distorted center turns all power into chaos. A clear center transforms all power into divine strength. Christ is waiting, not out there, but right here, within the temple of your thought. And if you turn back just for a moment, everything will realign. Life will no longer feel like a battle, but become a steady, ordered, radiant flow. Peter, faith as a spiritual standpoint. Faith is not blind optimism, but unwavering loyalty to divine law. It places principle above appearances and anchors the mind amid contradiction. Peter is the first power to arise when Christ returns to the center, for nothing can truly begin without the foundation of faith. But the faith spoken of here is not blind optimism, nor hollow declarations meant to soothe emotion. Faith is a spiritual standpoint, an unwavering allegiance to divine law, regardless of what the senses report or what outer circumstances reveal. It does not cling to appearances, but roots its identity in an unchanging principle. This is why Peter is called the rock, not because he was born unwavering, but because he learned to stand on truth rather than sway with appearances. When faith is merely emotional, it disappears the moment the storm arrives. When faith is merely hopeful, wishing, it collapses when reality pushes back. But when faith becomes a standpoint, it becomes the axis around which the entire mind stabilizes. You may still feel fear, you may still perceive contradiction, but you no longer allow those fluctuations to determine your direction. Faith does not deny outer facts. It simply refuses to give them authority. It looks directly at the facts, but places them beneath a higher law. This is a subtle but decisive difference. The person without faith stands before adversity and allows the mind to drift into worst-case scenarios. They let circumstance write the story, and their actions follow fear. In contrast, the person of faith sees the same challenge but asks a different question. What does divine law say in this situation? They base their thinking on principle, not circumstance. And when the mind pivots in this way, the entire inner system stabilizes like a ship tossed by waves, suddenly finding its anchor. Emmet once taught that true faith is not something you beg for, it is something you train until it becomes second nature. Not faith in the outcome, not faith in timing, but faith in the law that governs the universe, the law of divine intelligence that orchestrates all things. When you place your loyalty in the law, you no longer panic over delay or temporary failure. You know that outcomes are surface phenomena, while the law is silently returning all things to rightful order. In your mind, Peter is the first voice that responds when Christ is awakened. It is the steady voice, perhaps quiet but unmistakable, that says there is a principle higher than this fear. When you stand in confusion, faith is the first step onto ground that seems invisible. You may not see the whole path ahead, but you can choose to step forward because you know there is a foundation. Faith may not eliminate doubt immediately, but it refuses to let doubt drive. Observe how faith operates. A problem arises, you feel worry, you hear doubt, you sense pressure, but instead of chasing these voices, you turn inward and ask, what principle governs this situation? You choose to think according to law, not according to emotional report. You see lack, but you think from abundance. You feel weak, but you think from strength. You hear fear, but you answer with truth. And every time you do this, you are training Peter to stand firm, turning faith into a pillar rather than a passing moment. Those without faith sway with circumstances. Each external shift knocks the mind off balance. But the person of faith is like a lighthouse, not swallowed by the sea, but shining through the storm. They shine not because they never feel fear, but because they have anchored their identity to something unshakable. This is the essence of faith. As a spiritual standpoint, the miracle is this. When faith becomes a standpoint, all your actions and words naturally reflect that order. You no longer delay, waiting for favorable feelings. You no longer postpone movement until motivation appears. You act because you times know, and that knowing does not come from evidence, but from principle. You walk not because you see the path, but because you know the foundation is there, and every such step strengthens the Peter within you. Peter may fall, may deny, may tremble, but what sets him apart is that he always returns. Faith is not a perfect state, immune to all faltering. Faith is a continual return. It is loyalty measured not by feeling, but by the repeated choice to stand in truth, even when illusion seems easier to believe. As you train your faith in this way, you will begin to notice a subtle but profound change. You stop worshiping the problem. You stop giving power to fear. You stop letting doubt sit in the command chair. Instead, You live times as if times the law is true, because the law times is times true. You begin to speak more clearly, decide more wisely, and even your posture and gaze reflect a steadiness that others can sense. Peter is the first gate to the Christ order. Once he stands firm, the other faculties know where to go. Without Peter, the other disciples still wander, but when faith holds fast, love, reason, discernment, and all that remains find their rightful place, the throne is no longer threatened, for the rock has been set. Faith as a spiritual standpoint is not a gift granted to a few. It is a power present in everyone. It does not depend on circumstance, but on what you choose to be loyal to. If you are loyal to fear, you will reap disorder. If you are loyal to ego, you will reap exhaustion. But if you are loyal to divine law, you will reap stability, peace, and enduring strength. The Peter within you is waiting to be awakened not by loud declarations, but by repeated daily choices to trust the law, to trust the truth, to trust the Christ reigning in your mind. And as you continue to make those choices, you will stand upon the rock regardless of the storm, the contradiction, or the shifting images of the outer world. For faith then will no longer be a fleeting feeling. It will be your nature, your foundation, your immovable standpoint. Andrew, action born of clarity. Andrew transforms spiritual standpoint into movement, not from pressure or showmanship, but from resonance with truth. Acting swiftly before the old mind distorts the voice of intuition. Andrew steps forth immediately after Peter, like a stream following the rock. If Peter is the spiritual standpoint that anchors the mind, then Andrew is the action that flows from that clarity. Faith cannot remain stagnant in contemplation. It must become motion. But the action here does not arise from external pressure. It is not haste to prove oneself, nor display to impress others. Andrew's movement is a natural response to truth. When you times know, you move. When you times see, you act, not to impress, but to give truth a body in the world, within the mind. Andrew is the faculty that converts the stability of faith into tangible steps. Without Andrew, faith risks becoming trapped in theory, affirmed, but never proven. But when Andrew awakens, belief transforms into creative force. Action is no longer a struggle to escape fear, but a cooperation with divine order. You no longer act out of urgency, you act because you times know times the time has come. There is a profound difference between action born of fear and action born of clarity. Action from fear is frantic, confused, performed just to fill the void. It is like a drummer beating wildly, producing noise but no rhythm. In contrast, action from clarity is quiet yet precise, like a conductor lifting the baton at the exact moment, setting the orchestra in motion with perfect timing. Andrew is that conductor within your mind, ensuring your actions are not ruled by emotional storms, but led by the rhythm of the law. You've experienced the whisper of Andrew before. That moment when a thought arises so clearly, it needs no debate. When a nudge from within pierces through the mental fog like light through clouds, in that moment, if you act, you feel a strange and powerful support lift you. But if you hesitate, if you wait for old logic to weigh in, that clarity dims, veiled again by doubt. Andrew is the power that ensures you act while the clarity is still intact. Before a delay distorts intuition, it is vital to understand Andrew does not act out of ambition, but from loyalty to truth. His movement is not driven by desire for approval or praise, but to complete a cycle. From clear thought to tangible reality, this is how truth functions in the world. It requires a hand, a step, a voice to manifest. And Andrew is the faculty within you that brings that into being. Think back to how many moments you've missed. An idea came, you felt the clarity, but you hesitated. You waited until it felt safer, until the risk was gone, and in that waiting, the clarity faded. Doubt filled the gap, and the moment passed. Andrew is the power that opposes such hesitation. When he is alive in you, you stop waiting for perfection and start moving. The moment truth touches your mind. Can you see that it was these small but timely steps that shaped your path? A phone call you delayed, a truth you withheld, a decision you postponed, all reflect whether Andrew was heard. And today, the question for you is this. When clarity arises, will you dare to act? If you're listening to this now, I invite you to leave a mark for yourself and for me of your presence. Comment below, I am ready to change, or simply type the number ×1*, because in doing so, you are taking action, however small, born of clarity. That is Andrew within you beginning to speak. And I sincerely thank you for being here, for your very presence is proof that the seed of action from truth still lives within you. Andrew teaches a vital lesson. Not every action has value, only timely action born of clarity holds the power to transform. When you begin to live with Andrew, you'll find you no longer act to fill a void, but to embody truth. Each step becomes a declaration of loyalty to the law. Each deed, however small, becomes an expression of Christ moving through you. And from this, you learn a deeper truth. Real action does not begin from pressure, nor from the desire to prove your worth, but from the silent rhythm of clarity. When you know, you do. When you hear, you respond. When you see, you step. It is not action you produce, it is Christ within you, initiating movement. And as you stay loyal to that rhythm, your life is no longer caught in the loop of hesitation, but becomes a steady stream from illuminated thought to visible expression. Andrew is not just a symbol, he is a living experience. Each time you do what you know is right, in spite of fear, Andrew rises within you. Each time you pause, listen to clarity, and walk in loyalty, you allow action to become the bridge between faith and reality. And as that bridge grows stronger, your life adopts a new rhythm, one in which every act is an echo of divine truth. James, son of Zebedee, right judgment and discernment. He is the inner sword that separates noise from truth. Emotion from principle, not to punish, but to purify, guarding the sacred order within against storms of opinion. James, son of Zebedee, rises like a gleaming sword in the inner temple. He does not come to destroy or condemn, but to discern, for nothing leads the mind astray faster than the inability to distinguish between noise and truth, between fleeting emotion and enduring principle. James is the power that protects the inner order, ensuring that the temple of the mind is not swept away by the storms of opinions and illusions. In daily life, we are surrounded by countless sounds, voices, opinions, and emotions. Each thought rushes in like a wave, seizing our attention and convincing us of its importance. Without James, the mind becomes an open harbor. Any ship may dock, carrying any cargo, no matter how toxic. But when James is awakened, he lifts the sword of discernment, separating what must be kept from what must be released, not with anger, but with clarity. James teaches that not every thought deserves a place in your mind. Some are mere shadows, knee-jerk reactions, repeated memories devoid of truth. Not every emotion needs to be nurtured. Some come only to alert and pass, but if you cling to them, they become chains. James does not suppress emotion nor deny it. He simply looks at it and asks, does this serve truth? That question acts like light in darkness, revealing distorted shapes for what they are, illusions that vanish under the gaze of clarity before James is awakened. You may be swept into the stories of your own mind. You hear a whisper of doubt and mistake it for reality. You recall a painful memory and allow it to define your present. You feel fear and rush to act upon it. But when James is alive in you, you learn to step back from these waves. You stop arguing with emotions. Stop letting them lead you. You lift the sword of discernment and see clearly what is real and what is illusion. James's power lies not in force, but in refinement. Some confuse true judgment with harsh condemnation, but James does not come to accuse. He does not wield the sword to wound, but to cleanse. Like a goldsmith tapping impurities from raw metal, James chips away thoughts, emotions, and opinions that no longer serve truth. The result is a clearer inner order, not because you control everything, but because you now choose wisely. When James is active, your mind is no longer flooded by every passing noise. You become quieter, not because the world is less noisy, but because you no longer permit all that noise to enter the temple. You begin to notice where your energy is leaking, where cycles repeat without purpose, and in this growing stillness, the sacred order of Christ becomes easier to see. With fewer fragments cluttering the space, the temple shines again, structured, balanced, and clear. James also guards you from the most subtle form of spiritual corruption, self-deception. As long as you harbor thoughts that contradict truth, you build invisible walls that keep Christ from reigning fully. James helps you shine a light upon those layers of false justification. He makes you pause mid-thought and ask, is this from truth or from fear? That single question becomes a sword that severs chains, freeing you from long-held illusions. You might say James is the gatekeeper of the temple. Nothing enters without being examined. He keeps the inner sanctuary pure so that Christ may dwell without distraction. And it is through James that you can remain grounded while the outer world erupts in chaos. He doesn't stop the storms, but he ensures your vessel remains intact. James, son of Zebedee, reminds you that divine law requires clarity, not blindness. Faith must be protected by discernment. Love must be upheld by clarity. Without James, your trust may turn into delusion. Your kindness may turn into weakness. But when James is present, you become both compassionate and clear, both firm and gentle, both open-hearted and wisely boundaried. This is why the inner sword must never be missing. For if Peter gives you the foundation, and Andrew gives you action, then James gives you protection. He ensures that every movement follows the right direction, that every act arises from principle, not from confusion. And when he takes his rightful place, your temple is secure, ready for the other powers to emerge in divine order. John. Love as the binding force of consciousness, not sentimental nor indulgent, but the cohesive power that holds truth together, balancing James's sword of discernment so that the structure of spirit remains both sharp and warm. John enters the temple of the mind like an invisible thread that holds the entire spiritual architecture together. If James carries the sword to discern, John carries the flame to warm, ensuring that truth does not become brittle and that order does not harden into cold walls. John is love, not indulgent affection, not fleeting emotion, but the cohesive force that keeps the fragments of consciousness from shattering. In life, you may have felt clarity but become cold. You knew what was right, but when you spoke it, others felt distance. That is James without John. Discernment without love easily becomes division. But when John is present, truth is enveloped in warmth. You no longer just times speak, times the truth. You speak it in a way that uplifts. You no longer just times see times error. You see the potential for restoration. John's love doesn't dilute truth. It makes it receivable. John also keeps the mind from fracturing in the storm of thought. When James has cut away what no longer belongs, it is John who mends what must remain. He is the invisible glue that makes the structure of the mind whole again. Without John, the mind becomes severe, decisive, but devoid of compassion, discerning, but isolated. With John, the sharpness of the sword is tempered by the warmth of light. The love John brings is not weakness or permission without boundaries. It is the unwavering flow of a river carving through stone, not through struggle, but through presence. This love is not blind. It never compromises with falsehood, yet it always preserves connection. You can release an old habit, leave behind an outdated belief, but you never abandon yourself. John teaches you to love, not with fleeting emotion, but with loyalty to the principle of life. That is why in sacred scripture, John is called the beloved disciple, not because he was favored, but because he represents the quality that allows Christ to operate fully in the mind. Without love, discernment becomes harsh. Without love, wisdom becomes control. Without love, even faith can become blind. John is the balancing force that unifies all the powers into a cohesive whole. When John lives in you, you no longer need to prove love through grand gestures. Love becomes an atmosphere. Others feel safe near you, not because you always do everything right, but because your mind holds its integrity. That presence needs no lengthy explanation. It simply radiates, and that is why people trust, not because you have all the answers, but because you carry connection. The love of John teaches a profound truth. Discernment does not eliminate people. It elimina distorsion. The sword of James separates right from wrong, but John's love ensures you never confuse a person with their mistake. Thus, you can see through chaos and still remain kind. You can walk away from toxicity without turning it into resentment. You can discern clearly and still uphold the integrity of love. Over time, as you live this way, love ceases to be a reaction of the heart and becomes a times function of consciousness. Like the invisible gravity holding planets in orbit, you cannot see it, but everything remains intact because of it. John's love keeps your mind from unraveling, prevents the split between intellect and feeling, between faith and action. It holds all things as one, and in that unity, you hear a different sound, not from outside, but from the deep within. This is the power of the voice within times, not just a voice you hear, but a place you return to. The love of John is that inner space where every judgment is placed in the context of connection, where every decision is steeped in compassion. This love does not weaken you. It gives you the strength to stand firm without becoming rigid, to remain resolute without turning ruthless. It gives you the power to live in truth without using truth as a weapon to divide. It allows you to act according to law without making law a burden. John ensures that your temple is not only correct, but alive, not only orderly, but radiant. Without John, spiritual life is merely a rigid framework. But with John, that framework is clothed in warmth, like a house not only with walls, but with a fire in the hearth. And it is that fire that others come to and find warmth. John allows truth to become light, not only to illuminate, but to nourish. This is why when Christ is at the center, John is always the closest, so that love is never absent in the divine order of the mind. Philip, the order and living structure of the mind. He arranges inspiration into systems, places ideas in their rightful place, transforms divine law from abstraction into a living rhythm you can walk upon, helping thoughts move from chaos into form. Philip enters the temple of the mind like a patient builder, silently placing each brick of thought into its proper place. If Peter is the foundation stone, Andrew the first step, James the sword of discernment, and John the flame of love, then Philip is the quiet hand that ensures everything becomes not only clear but livable, for inspiration without order dissolves into mist, and ideas without system are but passing sparks. Philip is the faculty that translates divine truths from abstraction into a rhythm you can walk daily. Think of a garden. You may have rare seeds, rich soil, sunlight, and rain, but without structure. It becomes a tangle of plants competing for space. Philip is the one who plants in rows prunes at the right time and lays paths so that the garden is not just alive but beautiful. In your mind, Philip does the same. He doesn't allow thoughts to overflow or inspiration to burst and fade. He places each idea into structure, linking them into a system that serves a higher pattern. Philip reminds you that divine law is not a theory to admire from afar, but a framework to live by in detail. When Philip is at work, you stop reading truth as poetic phrases and begin to live by their rhythm. Faith has its place, action its timing, discernment its role, love its atmosphere. Philip turns each power into part of a greater symphony, making your whole life a coherent harmony. Without Philip, the mind easily becomes patchwork. You may hear a lesson, catch a flash of insight, but have nowhere to place it. You may try many methods, many rituals, but none of them link together. The result is fatigue and fragmentation. But when Philip lives in you, the scattered pieces begin to find their place. You stop chasing emotions or clinging to ideas. You begin building a stable inner architecture. This doesn't mean you become mechanical or rigid. Philip doesn't build cold frameworks. He builds forms through which life can flow. Just as a river needs banks to guide its course, thought needs structure to avoid becoming chaos. Philip teaches you to distinguish between fleeting inspiration and enduring principle. He helps you keep what is lasting, let go of what is temporary, and arrange everything into a path. You can walk without getting lost. When Philip is awakened, you no longer ask, what should I do next, based only on feeling, but instead ask, where does this idea fit within my inner system? You learn not only to receive, but to arrange, not only to experience, but to build, not only to live by emotion, but to live by order. Then the temple of your mind becomes a strong architecture, firm in its foundation, sheltered by its roof, balanced by its pillars. Emmet once said that the universe operates like perfect mathematics, never in disorder. Philip is the mirror of that principle within you. When Philip leads, you begin to feel that your life, too, has order. What once seemed random now reveals connection. What once felt fragmented now forms a picture. And you realize only when your thoughts gain structure can you become a channel of divine order. No one can walk forever on sparks of inspiration. They arrive and vanish, leaving emptiness. But the one who knows how to structure, who knows how to build, captures that light and sets it into bricks, into walls, into pathways. That is Philip's sacred labor within your mind. He helps you shift from chasing the light to building with it. And when that house is complete, you are no longer a witness of truth. You become the dwelling place of truth itself. Philip teaches that spiritual maturity is not measured by how many inspirations you've had, but by the structure you've built. You may be moved hundreds of times, But if your thoughts remain scattered, your life will stay unstable. Conversely, even a few principles, well placed into a solid structure, can make you steady through any storm. This is the enduring strength, that Philip brings us strength, not from quantity, but from placement. When you let Philip guide you, you'll notice your mind is no longer a wild stream without direction, but a river with banks, with flow, with destination. Your inspirations no longer fade away. They become the bricks of your living reality. And in that architecture, Christ remains at the center, lighting every level, so that the temple of your mind becomes both firm and radiant, filled with structure and pulsing with life. Bartholomew, the pure vision beyond the lens of wounding, he sees through illusions, born of wounds, stops romanticizing or dramatizing, and observes with clarity, so the other powers may function without distortion. Bartholomew is the clear eye of the soul, the power of transparent vision that enables you to see truth untainted by wounds, memories, or fear. He adds no color, draws no decoration upon life's canvas. He simply wipes the dust from the mirror so reality can appear as it truly is. In the spiritual journey, this is an essential faculty, for if you see wrongly, all other powers go astray, faith becomes blind, action becomes rushed, discernment becomes prejudice, love becomes sentimentality. Only when Bartholomew is in place can the other powers function in harmony. Most of what we call reality is merely interpretation. You don't see things as they are. You see them through the lens of the mind. And when that lens is shaped by wounds, you easily romanticize or catastrophize. A neutral glance can be interpreted as contempt. A pause in conversation may be labeled rejection. A small failure may be magnified into a tragic ending. And in such moments, Bartholomew has been forgotten. When Bartholomew awakens, he invites you to observe without rushing to assign meaning. He gives you eyes that can see through the disguises of emotion and recognize events for what they truly are. Instead of assuming silence means hatred, you see that silence is simply silence. Instead of concluding that loss is the end, you see it as a change in form. Instead of viewing others through the veil of past scripts, you begin to see patterns and what is actually unfolding beyond the old narrative. This is vision not guided by hurt, but illuminated by spirit. Bartholomew teaches that spiritual vision is not about seeing more, it's about seeing more clearly. The less you are conditioned by emotion, the closer you are to truth. The less you are driven by painful memory, the more present you become to what times is. This is the freedom of a transparent gaze, one that neither dresses reality in dreams nor drowns it in despair. It is a gaze that is honest, pure, and fair. You may recall many times when you were trapped in misinterpretation. A friend did not respond. You assumed they forgot you. A passing criticism, you believed you were worthless. A closed opportunity, you labeled it a cursed fate. But when you pause and let Bartholomew shine light, you see that all of it was meaning you imposed. The truth is often far more simple. You were not abandoned, you were interpreting. You didn't fail, you were learning. You weren't robbed, you were shifting. The power of Bartholomew changes how you receive life. It teaches you not to trust your first reaction because it is often written by fear and memory. He invites you to look again, this time with the light of spirit. And when you do, reality unfolds with more depth and more accuracy. This is not a cold gaze, it is a liberating one. For once you see the truth, you no longer have to fight the shadows. Your mind created. Bartholomew opens you to a subtle wisdom. When your vision is pure, the other powers begin to operate in balance. Faith becomes firm because it rests on truth, not illusion. Action becomes decisive because it is guided by clarity, not confusion. Discernment becomes just because it is based on what times is, not what is distorted. Love becomes strong because it sees others as they are, not as you imagine. His vision also does not allow you to continue living as a victim of your old stories. It reminds you that most of your pain does not come from what happened, but from how you looked at what happened. Change your gaze, and you change the entire experience. This is a deep freedom, for you are no longer imprisoned by outdated lenses. You learn to see with the eye of spirit, and in doing so, you escape the looping cycles of wounded perception. In the temple of the mind, Bartholomew is like a freshly cleaned window. The light enters unfiltered, and the whole inner space becomes bright. You no longer fumble in the dark of speculation. You walk in the light of truth. And when that light fills the space, you realize life was never as harsh as the mind made it seem. It is clearer, purer, and far more breathable when seen rightly. Bartholomew offers you the gift of spiritual clarity, no embellishment, no denial, no distortion, just observation. In that observation, you find the strength to walk without losing your way, because you are seeing the path as it truly is, and in that pure seeing, Christ at the center shines all the more brightly, for there is no longer any veil blocking that light from reflecting through the temple of your mind. Thomas, the depth that tests truth, not a doubt that destroys, but a refining inquiry that demands authentic inner contact, a slowing down to distinguish fleeting inspiration from rooted transformation. Thomas is often associated with doubt, yet within the inner temple, he is not the destroyer of faith, but its guardian through refinement. Thomas is the depth of inquiry, the slow and necessary voice reminding you to pause and test, to discern between momentary inspiration and transformation that has truly taken root. Without Thomas, faith can become surface level, easily swept up in emotional highs, easily mistaking temporary excitement for lasting change. But when Thomas stands in his rightful place, you learn not to chase the glittering surface, but to wait patiently for truth to prove itself through endurance. Thomas does not seek grand declarations, nor is he persuaded by hollow affirmations. He wants to times touch, times the truth, to times taste, times it at its source. He is not content to hear what others say. He must times, know times from within his own experience. This is not defiant doubt. It is loyalty to what is real. For if something is truly true, it will stand firm under examination. And if it collapses beneath a few honest questions, it was never a foundation worthy of your temple. Thomas teaches that in spiritual life, not every flash of light is true. Illumination. Some come from temporary excitement, but fade. Some beliefs sound captivating, but cannot stand when trial comes. Some experiences stir your heart, but vanish like summer rain. Thomas arrives to ensure you are not a victim of emotional waves. He invites you to pause, press deeper, ask thoroughly, and accept only what can endure the winds of reality. When Thomas is active, you learn the difference between inspiration and transformation. Inspiration may ignite fire in a moment, but transformation creates lasting warmth. Inspiration may lead you to speak great words, but transformation causes you to live differently. Even in the smallest choices, inspiration may drive you to promises, but transformation makes you steady, even when no one sees. Thomas reminds you not to be seduced by the flame that flares up quickly, but to wait and see if it becomes a steady, enduring light. He also teaches that silence can be more precious than shouting when he questions. It is not to showcase intellect, but to create space for truth to emerge. For truth does not require defense through noise. It only needs a mind willing to listen. In that listening, you begin to see what has roots and what is only leaves, and once roots are deep, no wind can topple them. Many fear Thomas because they fear their questions will undo their faith. But in truth, any faith that cannot survive a question was never faith at all. Thomas comes to free you from credulity and replace it with grounded certainty. He helps you leave behind the false security of pre-packaged answers to discover the true stability of personal experience. This is the depth. Only Thomas brings a depth that cannot be borrowed from others, but must be forged within. On your journey, Thomas stands as the soul's gatekeeper, allowing only what is truly durable to enter. He lets you test, lets you verify, lets you times touch and see, and in doing so, you are no longer swept away by passing ideas. You build your temple with stones that have been tested by fire, not with soft foam that dissolves at the first blow. Thomas doesn't slow you to hinder you. He slows you to stabilize you. He teaches that slow and deep is better than fast and shallow. For what has deep roots will stand for a long time, but what is only a polished shell will crumble when challenge arrives. Through Thomas, you learn to face truth directly, to accept the slowness of true process, and to trust that every sincere question opens a greater door, and in that silence, you discover a secret. Thomas is not there to make you doubt yourself, but to help you become honest with yourself. He does not ask questions to destroy your belief, but to clear away what is not yet real. Thus, when you finally stand upon a principle, it is not passing emotion, but truth deeply rooted. From that foundation, all other powers in the temple grow stronger and more enduring. Thomas is the proof that questioning is not the enemy of faith, but its wise companion. He reminds you, truth never fears testing, only illusion does. And once you learn to let Thomas live within you, you no longer swing between belief and doubt. You walk with the steadiness of direct experience. This is the power of spiritual depth, the power that comes when you are brave enough to slow down, test deeply, and be radically honest with yourself. Matthew, the transmutation of memory into wisdom, not erasing the past, but reinterpreting it under the light of Christ, ceasing to worship the story of wounds, and retelling it from the standpoint of one who has risen. Matthew steps forward like the scribe of the soul, not to record what has happened, but to rewrite its meaning. He is the faculty that transmutes memory into wisdom, transforming what once was a burden into a foundation. In this sacred process, Matthew does not erase the past. He does not deny the wounds, nor whitewash the mistakes. He brings instead the light of Christ to illuminate those memories, so they are no longer prisons, but treasures. Look at how we usually treat memory. Some cling to their wounds as though they're the only identity they have. They repeat the stories of betrayal, loss, and failure, letting them define their very being. Memory becomes a silent god, unknowingly worshipped day after day. Others attempt to erase the past, rejecting, suppressing, or burying it, hoping that silence will make it disappear. But memory does not disappear. It quietly shapes your thoughts and actions from the shadows. Matthew comes to end both extremes. When Matthew is alive in you, the past ceases to be a jailer. It becomes a teacher. He gives you new eyes through which to view old wounds. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? You begin asking, what was awakened within me because of it? Instead of identifying as a victim, you recognize yourself as the one who rose from the ashes. And when the story is told from that new position, the old energy loses its grip and only wisdom remains. This transformation is not denial, it is reinterpretation. The scar still exists, but instead of proving you were hurt, it becomes evidence that you were healed. The mistake remains, but no longer as a verdict against you, but as a stepping stone toward maturity. The loss still happened, but rather than a theft, it reveals your capacity to release. Matthew is the strength that turns each memory into a building block rather than letting them remain burdens. Importantly, Matthew does not let you stop at self-comfort. He does not spin the story into soothing affirmations to help you hide. He leads you to honesty, to face the past exactly as it was, to touch the pain, and to shine a higher principle upon it. And in that honesty, memory is set free. When you dare to look and reinterpret, you sever the power of old stories and restore the throne to Christ. Matthew is also the voice within you when you stop telling your story as proof of weakness and begin to tell it as evidence of resurrection. And in that moment, you realize this is the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, not a sound that reminds you you have survived, but a presence that reveals you are held in truth. That inner voice no longer cries in sorrow. It becomes the atmosphere of clarity. Picture yourself entering the library of your mind. On the shelves are hundreds of books, each one a memory. Before Matthew is awakened, you tend to reread the saddest volumes, the chapters of pain, the stories of loss. But when Matthew arrives, he does not burn the books. He rewrites their titles. The volume once called Failure is renamed The Lesson of Patience. The one titled Betrayal becomes the opening to freedom. What was once loss is now rebirth. No memory is discarded. Everyone is transformed to serve your growth. Matthew teaches you to stop worshiping the past as a god of power, for when you keep repeating the story of your wounds, you are offering your energy to it. Instead, he invites you to let that story be illuminated, to let Christ redefine its meaning. Then the past no longer chains the present, but becomes a staircase to higher ground within the temple of the mind. Matthew is like an editor of the manuscript. He reads each page, crosses out the distortions, and adds lines that reflect a higher truth. The result is a very different manuscript, not because the events have changed, but because your narration has changed, and that retelling determines your posture in life, the stance of one crushed, or the stance of one who has risen. Matthew reminds you there is no memory too heavy to be transmuted. Even the experiences you once believed are destroyed, you can become sources of strength when placed under the light of Christ. What is required is only the courage to look again and the willingness to reinterpret. Once you do this, you no longer fear the past. For you know that any memory can become a stone in your sacred temple. This is the quiet yet mighty work of Matthew. He frees you from the loops of old memory so you may enter the liberty of wisdom. He teaches that memory is not a prison guard. It is raw material for the soul's epic. And when you allow Matthew to live within you, you no longer tell the story of your wound. You begin telling the story of the one who stood up. In that new story, Christ is no longer just a concept, but the light guiding every page of your unfolding life. Simon the Zealot, fearful, refined. This fire is no longer a blind rebellion, but a sacred will, shattering inertia, refusing to compromise with mediocrity, and charging forward with unshakable resolve rooted in principle. Simon the Zealot emerges as a blazing fire within the temple of the mind, but no longer the chaotic flame of old days. It is now a flame refined into divine will. In the depths of the inner life, Simon represents a passion that cannot be extinguished, a current of relentless energy that refuses to let the soul settle for the ordinary. When the other faculties have found their place, Simon arrives to break inertia and awaken within you the force to push through delay, hesitation, and ease. In the journey of life, there are many moments when you know what is right, but lack the fire to act, lack the thrust to break free from the comfort zone. You hear the call of principle, but laziness and familiar comfort hold you back. At that very point, Simon steps in, not with gentle words, but with fire that drives you forward. He declares that loyalty to Christ is not merely about understanding or agreement, but about decisive action according to principle, even when it is hard, even when it forces you to face resistance from within. Simon was once a rebel, burning everything he touched with anger and resistance. But when that fire was refined by Christ, it no longer destroyed indiscriminately. It became a brilliant will that pierced through every obstacle. This is the power you feel each time. You know it is time to act, but still hesitate. Simon is the voice that stirs, the current that breaks the glacier of inertia. When he reigns, you no longer make excuses. You no longer delay. You no longer avoid. You choose to act, because that is loyalty to the new order. Remember that Christ never calls you to live halfway. He does not want you to listen and nod, then return to the same loops. He wants you to burn bright with decisiveness, like Simon, who transformed himself into refined fire. In that moment, you stop wasting energy on meaningless resistance, and instead focus it entirely on walking with principle. This is passion without blindness, power without destruction, intensity without extremism. Have you ever experienced such a moment when a deep certainty inside you said that now is the time, that delay is no longer an option? Can you feel that fire waiting to be awakened within? If so, let me know your presence on this journey. Leave a comment with a declaration to yourself that says, I do not compromise with mediocrity, or simply a small sign to let me know you are still listening. Thank you for walking with me. For your presence is proof that Simon's fire never went out. Simon will not let you hide behind empty promises. He demands you take the step, turn awareness into action, let the heat of will illuminate the path. He reminds you that inertia is the enemy of the soul, that compromise with mediocrity is a betrayal of Christ at the center. And every time you choose to rise, to move forward, even while your heart trembles, you allow Simon's fire to burn away the chains of the old and open the door for a new pattern to emerge. Simon's refined fire brings with it purification. It burns away the pretending, the hiding, and the excuses. It leaves you bare but honest, fragile but clear, ready to be led. And from that clarity, you become immovable. For now, you act not to prove something, but because principle demands it. You do not move because of fleeting emotion, but because you are loyal to the divine law, now shining in your mind. Simon teaches you that intensity is not rigidity. It is unwavering conviction without compromise. This fire does not consume you. It liberates you. It gives you the strength to walk away from the exhausting cycle of procrastination, to shatter the illusion of safety, to say no to mediocrity. And in that fierce clarity, you begin to taste a strange kind of freedom, the kind only found when the soul is released from its own inertia. When Simon reigns, you no longer back away from difficulty. You look at the challenge and see it as the opportunity for your fire to burn brighter. You walk, not because the road is easy, but because it is right. And in every step, you carry the refined flame, warming yourself and illuminating the path for others. Simon has become the sacred fire within you, the fire that will not let you live small. the fire that thrusts you into the great life that Christ has already prepared. Thaddaeus, conscious reception and surrender, attuned to the sacred rhythm. He recognizes when to listen and when to yield, ceasing to micromanage reality in order to enter the flow of revelation. Thaddaeus appears like a gentle yet penetrating breeze, unveiling a realm of power rarely acknowledged, the ability to receive and to surrender with awareness. While Simon brings a blazing fire, James wields the sword of discernment, and Philip erects the inner structure. Thaddaeus is the open door through which the inspiration of the divine enters. He does not embody the strength of control nor the striving to shape reality by force. He is the subtle sensitivity to divine rhythm, the silent listening, the surrender that lets a higher order lead the way. Surrender here is not passive resignation. It is not bowing to circumstances nor relinquishing power. The surrender Thaddaeus brings is a conscious choice, a laying down of the need to manage every detail of life in order to make space for a greater wisdom to move. It is precisely in this space that the mind is freed from the endless loops of control and enters the river of revelation. In daily life, people constantly seek to calculate, predict, and arrange every step. We want to know the outcome in advance, to be certain of safety, to ensure that everything remains within our grasp. But the tighter we cling, the tenser the mind becomes, and the further the spirit drifts from peace. Thaddaeus comes to remind us that we are not meant to carry the universe on our shoulders. There is a higher intelligence already in operation. Only when we cease managing every detail, only when we dare to trust and listen, can we perceive the path our soul truly needs to take. Thaddaeus does not work through loud logic. He whispers. He does not arrive with dramatic signals, but with a quiet certainty in the heart. It is a subtle knowing of when to act, when to pause, when to speak, and when to remain silent. This is a form of wisdom that does not arise from analytical thought, but from attunement to the sacred rhythm. One who awakens Thaddaeus within walks in a new cadence, not rushed, not hurried, but precise and timely. You may recall moments when your intuition urged you to wait just a little longer or to act immediately. When you obeyed, everything flowed. When you ignored it, confusion followed. That was the voice of Thaddaeus. He teaches you to distinguish between control driven by fear and surrender, born of trust. One leads to tension, the other to stillness. One spirals into anxiety, the other flows with revelation. Thaddaeus also reminds you that not all silence is empty. There is a silence full of life, where you cease filling the space with personal will and open up to listen. In that silence, guidance arises not as rational explanation, but as deep knowing. It is the moment when you stop commanding life to be this or that and begin allowing life to reveal what it already is. In this moment, you enter into resonance with the sacred principle that has always been at work. The power of Thaddaeus lies also in rejecting the chase for instant evidence. The world teaches you to see before you believe, but Thaddaeus invites you to believe and then see. He leads you into a state of sensitivity where, even without knowing the whole picture, you sense that you are in the right current. Surrendering with awareness means you do not demand every answer, but are willing to follow the clarity unfolding one step at a time. It is a mature trust that no longer depends on instant results, but rests in the long arc of divine law. Many consider control a form of strength, but it often masks fear. Excessive control stems from the belief that if I do not do it, no one will. But when Thaddaeus lives in you, you begin to understand that life already has a current of its own, and your role is not to command it, but to move in harmony with it. Releasing your grip on micromanagement does not weaken you. It strengthens you because now you are no longer alone. You let divine strength take on the larger task. While your part is to keep your mind clear and your door open, Thaddaeus' gentleness infused with power, he tunes your awareness to the most delicate movements of spirit, like a leaf trembling at the slightest breeze. And when you live in that sensitivity, you are no longer lost. For every step, every choice, every word carries the imprint of harmony. You no longer need to struggle to find the way, because the path unfolds beneath your feet as you walk in receptivity. This is the highest and hardest art, the sacred art of yielding to receive. When you stop controlling, you finally open. When you stop imposing, you begin to hear. When you surrender consciously, you see that true power is not in the grasp, but in allowing life to move through you. Thaddaeus turns you into an empty vessel, and it is precisely in your emptiness that you become full. Within the temple of the mind, Thaddaeus is the open window that welcomes the breeze of heaven. Without him, the temple becomes stifled by control. With him, it is filled with vitality through the natural flow. And it is within this space that Christ may breathe, speak, and act. Thaddaeus does not come to replace you, but to free you from the burden of having to move everything by your own strength. Through him, you learn the power of releasing in order to truly hold, of receiving in order to truly live within divine order. Wholeness, the mirror of possession and ego collapse. He reveals the divided heart that seeks to possess the divine on personal terms, and in his collapse opens the door for true presence to enter. Once the illusions fade, Judas appears as a mirrored reflection, a spiritual glass within the mind, exposing the ego's desire to own the divine and to frame it within personal conditions. He does not represent pure evil, but the manifestation of an immature mind where the will to control, to compare, and to possess has not yet surrendered to divine order. The divided heart of Judas is the natural outcome of a consciousness that has not yet understood the power of surrendering to a higher rhythm, a mind that still believes that individual will can override universal harmony in the temple of the mind. Judas is the mirror in which those brave enough to look will see themselves reflected, where the desire to be exalted, guaranteed, and to own the divine as if it were a possession, coexists with the belief that God must serve personal plans. This inner conflict breeds storms of confusion, emotional volatility, and distorted spiritual energy. No one is born knowing how to surrender. And Judas reminds us that collapse is an essential part of maturity, a necessary stage for true presence to arise. After every illusion has dissolved, the mirror Judas holds is not for judgment, but for illumination. When you dare to look into it, you recognize that every sorrow, disappointment, and sense of lack stems from the desire to possess what was never yours to begin with. You want God in your own image, you want the law to follow your design, and you want results that align with your personal expectations. But this need to possess becomes a wall, a blockage that prevents spiritual energy from flowing and the inner order from operating in its fullness. Judas teaches that collapse is not failure, but the doorway to a new rhythm of being. When illusions dissolve, when the urge to possess and the effort to control dissolve, what remains is a sacred emptiness. And it is in this emptiness that Christ may finally enter, no longer distorted by personal terms or divided intentions. This is the moment you realize that real power does not lie in grasping, but in letting go. And when you release, you lose nothing, you gain everything. As divine order begins to move unimpeded, the collapse of Judas is a lesson in inner honesty, When you want God on your terms, you are trading your freedom for the service of ego. When you stop imposing, you allow a higher power to rise. You allow true presence to govern every decision and every action. This is the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a sanctuary you return to. This is the moment you realize that presence is not summoned through effort, but arrives when you pause, when you surrender and allow divine order to enter. Judas reminds us that trying to possess the divine through personal terms creates a repetitive cycle of collapse. You seek security in power, in knowledge, in control, but these are temporary, and when they fail, you suffer. True presence requires no conditions, no proof, no possession. It only asks that you be willing to let go, to trust that the divine order is always ready to move. When you create that space, energy flows freely again, like a river washing through your soul, clearing away every illusion and every impulse to own what must only be received. The mirror Judas offers also reflects your relationships, your roles, and your expired beliefs that you still cling to. When you demand life to move according to your will, you are not only trying to possess God, but people, circumstances, and even time itself. This is the root of the divided heart. Nothing truly belongs to you. Yet you seek to control everything. Collapse occurs when this desire meets its limit, when you realize that every effort to control has only left you exhausted and disoriented. In that recognition, you begin to withdraw your energy from what has expired, creating space for the Christ pattern to breathe, allowing true order to rearrange the powers within your mind. Who thus, as a mirror, does not ask you to abandon yourself or lose your ambition. He asks you to discern what serves divine order and what merely feeds the ego. When you release the divided heart, when you stop trying to possess, you make space for all other spiritual powers to function properly. The sword of discernment from James, the cohesive love of John, the structured life of Philip, the sensitivity of Thaddaeus all resonate within this space where Christ can truly dwell. Collapse is a beginning, not an end. When Judas enters the storm of ego, he opens the way for true presence to emerge. No longer hidden behind personal craving, when you gaze into this mirror, you understand that every failure, every betrayal, every wound is but a signal urging you to surrender, to allow God to truly enter. This is not punishment, but loyalty to a higher order. Ultimately, Judas teaches that power does not lie in the grasp, but in knowing when to release. Possessive ego is like a shell that blocks inner power. When that shell breaks, when the illusion fades, the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a place you return to, emerges in its fullness. You are no longer a possessor, but a co-creator with divine law, allowing true presence to govern every thought, every feeling, and every action. Judas does not disappear, he simply steps aside so that light may enter. And it is this light that brings the harmony all other powers have been waiting for. Matthias, restoration of the pattern and the wholeness of stillness. He rises from the ashes, not to impress, but to restore order, replacing Judas with holy neutrality, embodying quiet wisdom and dependable integrity. Matthias emerges within the inner sanctuary like a gentle light, not dazzling, not demanding attention, but radiant enough to fill the space left behind by the fall of Judas. He does not arrive with noise or spectacle, but with the quiet intention to reestablish the sacred pattern that was once disrupted by divided loyalties, possessiveness, and egoic collapse. His appearance is a reminder that every internal power can be restored, that order and wholeness are not lost, but merely await realignment. When divine neutrality becomes your foundation, the pattern reconfigures itself and begins to breathe again. In the sacred temple of the mind, where every thought is a brick in the architecture of consciousness, Matthias teaches that restoration requires no display. His every movement flows from divine law, from the operating rhythm of the Christ presence, from a cultivated silence forged in trial. When his light enters, the fragments left behind by Judas are not erased, but seen, accepted, and repositioned as new foundations through the presence of holy neutrality. Matthias allows all inner powers to function again in harmony, no longer distorted by emotional chaos or personal agenda. Matthias comes not with promises of praise or prominence, but with the stability of sacred order. He exists for wholeness, for alignment, for the integrity of a trustworthy pattern that speaks through action rather than declaration. When he walks through the field of your being, things stop shaking. Powers stop colliding. Stillness arises not as absence of movement, but as a grounded field in which every decision, every response, every power flows in precision and inner wisdom. Replacing Judas does not mean erasing the past, but redefining the standard. Matthias does not deny the failures or wounds that occurred. He sets them in a new framework where every experience becomes a lesson and every fall becomes a marker of revival. This is the gift of sacred neutrality. It lifts the group out of ego entanglement and possessive impulse. It frees each aspect of your consciousness to return to order, to law, to the true presence of Christ at the center. The wholeness that Matthias restores is not abstract perfection, but tangible reliability in thought, emotion, and behavior. There is no more room for fragmentation. Energy is no longer scattered. Every inner faculty is seated in its rightful place. Every inspiration is calibrated within the framework permitted by divine law. Every word, every gesture, every choice becomes an echo of inner precision. It is not idealistic perfection, but credible wholeness, the kind you can rely on, the kind that lets you know things are running according to a higher pattern rather than emotional whim or egoic command. Matthias brings not just restoration, but the restoration of faith in your own spiritual structure. When the broken pieces are gently reset, when holy neutrality becomes the foundation, you realize strength does not lie in dominance or noise, but in stillness, in the ability to sustain harmony, even under pressure. Every breath, every glance, every step becomes a testament to order renewed, to a Christ pattern alive, without need for performance. He also reminds you that quiet wisdom is lasting wisdom. He does not teach grandiosity or heroic display, but a way of being rooted in truth, in the ability to remain unmoved in a storm, in the skill of directing energy without dispersion toward a sacred objective through dependable small acts and humble yet firm choices. The entire internal system learns to move free of emotional reactivity or personal ambition. The arrival of Matthias is a lesson in loyalty to a higher order. He does not operate from feeling or justification, but from the decision to place divine law and Christ at the center of every thought and move. When you live from this template, the internal order does not merely return. It becomes a mirror for others, a living pattern that all powers know how to follow in peace. Matthias does not replace Judas through domination, but by becoming an open space wide enough for divine breath to flow. He does not eliminate failure or pain, but transforms them into structure, into a foundation upon which sacred rhythm can be rebuilt. His presence is proof that wholeness does not come from escaping adversity, but from rearranging power around the center of law and letting order do its work. Through Matthias, you learn that restoring the pattern is a path of patience, of sacred neutrality, and of credible living. There is no need to prove anything, no need to draw attention, no need to justify your existence. You only need to live quietly in wisdom, to let the internal order run its course, to let Christ move freely within you, untouched by want or condition. In this place, stillness becomes a foundation. Every inner power is allowed to breathe in sync, and order and wholeness are no longer distant ideals, but present realities you touch with every breath and confirm with every choice. Matthias stands as a living testament that after every collapse, after every possession and divided loyalty, restoration is still possible. A pattern can be re-established, a sacred rhythm can be resumed, and life can once again be lived in fidelity to divine law. This is the trustworthy model that all inner powers seek. This is the stillness you can return to at any moment. This is quiet wisdom, strong enough to sustain wholeness without ever needing to be loud, completing the circle, the 12 powers unified under Christ. When the circle is complete, the 12 powers no longer stand as isolated fragments, but converge fully beneath the radiance of Christ. The mind is no longer a battlefield of inner conflict, but becomes a holy sanctuary, where every faculty is aligned and functions according to divine rhythm. No more dispersion, no more oscillation. Every thought, every impulse, every decision is now drawn toward a single center, Christ, at the helm, creating through you. This is not imagination. It is the tangible experience that arises when you enter presence, when you realize that all inner powers can unite without force, without display, simply by being rightly positioned within an already established order. In this inner temple, the channels are clear, no longer clogged by fear or doubt. Each power becomes a flowing river, nourishing thought, emotion, and action. You realize you no longer need to seek wholeness from outside, no longer require others or circumstances to validate your identity. Everything you once searched for, every answer you long to find, is now alive within you in the spiritual structure, anchored by divine order. This unity is not merely a state, but a rhythm of living in which every act, every decision bears witness to divine law moving through you. Each of the 12 powers plays its part without separation. Peter stands in unwavering faith. Andrew translates thought into clear action. James, son of Zebedee, holds the sword of discernment. John binds with love. Philip orders the architecture of life. Bartholomew watches with clarity. Thomas tests the truth. Matthew transforms memory. James, son of Alpheus, releases what no longer serves. Simon purifie passion. Thaddaeus yields with conscious surrender. Matthias restores the pattern with silent wholeness. Now, all of them move in a single rhythm guided by Christ. No more inner enemies, no more misalignment. Every faculty is opened, synchronized, and functioning within absolute unity with the mind as a temple where divine law is honored and enacted. What is extraordinary is that this rhythm does not rely on effort or emotional strain. It does not depend on mood or external triggers. The presence of Christ flows within the mind like a living current. Every inner faculty is drawn into motion by divine principle. When you live in this rhythm, you find that each choice holds power, each action falls into place, and each thought is refined. There is no more confusion, no more aimlessness, only the smooth, sacred function of inner powers operating in harmony with the blueprint of spirit. As you enter this completed circle, you also learn that inner order generates outer freedom. When the mind is no longer scattered, when the powers are united, every decision, every movement, every relationship becomes clear and purposeful. There is no need to control or force, no more second guessing, for everything flows from the invisible structure already activated within. In this state, truth is no longer filtered or distorted. It is embodied, visible in every gesture, every word, every thought. Each day lived in this rhythm is a walk in presence, where no part of you is fragmented or hidden. The 12 powers operate as one living system, beating like the heart of your being. You understand that every challenge, every conflict, every past failure was preparation for this convergence. Every experience became an opportunity for internal order to deepen. You now walk in a new rhythm where Christ is no longer a concept, but a living presence guiding every action, every word, every decision. This also reveals that unity is not sameness. It is not the loss of individuality, but the perfect coordination of all powers under a higher order. Each faculty retains its essence, but no longer acts independently of divine will. All are aligned by the law of spirit and the presence of Christ, forming a unified rhythm that is powerful yet gentle, sharp yet balanced, charged with strength yet grounded in stillness. In this state, the mind is no longer a stage for fear or confusion, but a temple where every faculty performs in symphonic harmony. You see that everything you need already lives within you. Every capacity can be activated. Every movement is divinely timed, no longer scattered, no longer divided, no longer pulled in different directions. Only the seamless rhythm of 12 powers unified operating through you as a sacred space Christ has consecrated. And as you live within this rhythm, you move through the world with a confidence that does not arise from ego, but from divine order itself. Each decision, each action, each word bears the mark of unity. You become a living testament to the power of Christ within. The mind is a sanctuary. The channels are open. Life unfolds naturally from within, untouched by circumstance or fleeting emotion. This is the completed circle, the unity of the 12 powers, and the full embodiment of divine law through your breath, your thoughts, your choices, and your life. As you reflect on this journey, remember that the power you seek has always been within. The 12 inner archetypes are not distant ideals. They are living currents in your consciousness, waiting for you to unify them under the guidance of Christ. Faith, action, discernment, love, structure, clarity, patience, deep inquiry, transformation, release, zeal, surrender, restoration, and inner unity. They are all yours to step into, one breath at a time. You do not need to chase completeness outside yourself. It begins when you return to the structure within, when the voice within guides you, when your inner temple is clear and alive. Step forward into this circle of unity and let your life become a living testament of inner harmony, wisdom, and divine alignment. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to